We are going to operate under the note well in this session. The note well is on the screen. If you're not familiar with it, take a quick skim, follow the links in it. You need to be familiar with what it's pointing to before participating. I'm trying to come up with something funny to do with that, and I can't. I apologize. I'll consider that a fail. I'll remember it for next time. All right, here's our agenda. It's actually quite tight. We've got a lot to talk about today. Do we have anyone that wants changes to the agenda? Is there anything we need to move around? Is there anything we missed that we need to talk about? All right, Chris, if you could be working your way up, we'll go ahead and jump in with a discussion on the shaken passports. Hang on a second.
So I'll just get started. This is a draft I submitted mostly for the purpose of reserving passport extension name and claim names related to the Attestation work. I have some slides that provide some details about the specific claims. I did get a comment directly from John that we might want to put a little more detail in there for specifically at Attest and Originating. I'm happy to go through that detail. I can either quickly go through it, or I don't know if people will have any specific questions. It's been talked about for quite a while now. If you're,
I can try it.
but basically, there's two claims at Attest, which represents how fully the signer can attest to the identity that's being represented in the identity header. Because currently in the telephone network, we have both SS7 and SIP-based origination, as well as intentional, whether it's illegitimate or legitimate, spoofing of telephone numbers. So these three categories basically represent the combination of all those criteria into what the originator can attest to. The hope is, of course, that we'll cover all the use cases long term, and everything can be fully attested to, and everybody can trust the identity that's been signed fully. But this is sort of a transitionary approach to make sure we cover all of the calls. The Orig ID is a concept where we can provide an opaque, unique identifier to a given originator that's inside the service provider network. So for example, a wholesale customer or a trunking customer, PBX, and this will help the service provider, the originator, to identify in cases of illegitimate activity where exactly in their network or which customer may be the source of that. So it's a lot to do with traceback and other activities. Could also be potentially used as a spam association tool as well. If you see a lot of illegitimate spam calls coming from a particular Orig ID, analytics can kick in and help using that Orig ID as well. And then other than that, there's the passport extension name shaken that's requested as well. Any questions beyond that? I have an example in the on the next page as well. So that's just you know, the passport extension in the header, and then the payload. There's 2 new claims there beyond the baseline claims.
Does anybody have any feedback for Chris? People have read this draft. If you've read this draft, okay, not as many people as I would like. Please give it a read during the week if you can. It's short. Send in a note about whether or not you think there's any issue with proceeding with it.
Okay, thank you.
Martin. Sorry, my laptop is arguing with me on where it's putting its keys.
Okay, so I'm Martin Daly from AT&T. This draft is done in conjunction with Vencor Labs in support of the Office of Emergency Communications under Department of Homeland Security in the U.S. Go to the 3rd slide. Okay, so thank you to the chairs, and we took opportunity to actually present the 00 draft at the interim call that was held on June 16th. It proposes a passport extension to convey cryptographic signed assertion of the authorization for communications with the resource priority header. It allows the authorized service provider to sign verified content within the SIP message to support of such services as NSAP, which is government priority services, as well as wireless priority services. It also applies to all the other namespaces, so civil emergency, as well as public safety, the MCPTT namespaces. Several comments were received after the initial submission, and these are reflected in the STIR-RPH00 draft, and subsequent after the interim call, this was accepted as a work item document on June 30th. Next slide. Okay, so the comments and the updates. Okay, so clarification of the user priority level. And so in section 3, we specify the RPH claim includes insertion of the priority level of the user to be used. Example of this is ETS.1 or ETS.2 or ETS.3. And that is the priority level that is assigned to that user. Syntactic, there was identified unnecessary nesting of the label, and that was corrected. Clarified that there was only one authority per claim. Okay, so though it doesn't exist today, in theory, you could have a one of the DoD namespaces present with a government priority namespace present. These are 2 different authorities, and so therefore any given namespace, there will only be one authority associated with that namespace. Clarify the authority of the credentials, and this was done in section 3. The authority must use its credentials associated with the specific service supported by the SIP namespace in the claim. That claim then goes back to the authority, so on and so forth. Explicit text, we're only using the full form of passport, so we added text to clarify that. Just make reference to 4474 bis, so text was taken out and the section was simplified. There were editorial nits also added. Next. Okay, so post doing those updates, we received comments from Janet Gunn on the mailing list relating to inconsistent text, reference in section 5, clarification of the IENIC considerations. We responded on the mailing list to these concerns and didn't get any additional feedback, so we feel that we've addressed those. The proposed resolution of these would be to update text in section 5 related to the definition of the RPH claim. In section 6 related to the IANA registration, passport types, specific request that the IANA add a new entry for registering the type RPH, and then passport RPH types, similar for the single value of auth for authorizing priority services. Next. Comments, welcome. Would like additional review by working group members, would be appreciated. After this meeting, we plan on submitting an 01 draft to reflect the comments shown or any additional comments that will be given at this meeting. Thank you.
So, Robert Sparks, thanks for addressing the comment that I had made about multiple authorities. I'm still a little confused, I think, and it's probably just confusion on my part. But if you could sketch for me quickly, you have a call that comes in, there is a signature, a passport object that's going to be created that makes the base attestations to the person that placed this call has authority to use this number. Is that same passport going to be extended with the RPH? So there's one signature that's making both the attestation, so it is a second passport object. Okay. Read through the text and make sure that that's going to be dead obvious to somebody that is coming in and reading this for the first time, because I was still a little puzzled.
Okay, so we were initially debating on having a single signing because in essence, at least for the WPS ETS service, you're actually authenticating the user because they have to enter in credentials in order to be authorized. So our thoughts in the beginning, because that was a higher level of authorization, that it would take precedence over the fact that they could use that telephone number, because it's a service designed where the service can be used from any telephone anywhere, right? So the fact the phone that you're using, the number you're making the call from is almost irrelevant. But as we work through certain use cases, we figured out that no, to cover them all, we're going to need to, and to not confuse, just keep them separate. Separate signing.
Separate passport with a separate signature.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, okay. I just want to be crystal clear.
So has everyone read this? You know, see who's read this draft. Looks like we've got pretty good coverage in here. With the clarification we've just made, I mean, how are people feeling about how cooked this is? Is this something you think we can last call like in the next month or so? All right. So I'll watch for the revision from you, Martin, and please do try to reflect this conversation.
We will,
and we'll bump it into last call definitely long before we get to Singapore.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Okay. Yes, the next thing we've got up is diversion and rich call data. So I think we've got a combined deck for these.
In the pink box. I am not going to make me. Okay. Hello. So we're going to talk about a couple of passport extensions. I don't think there's a lot to discuss here, but next slide, please. So Divert, this is a feature a lot of people want. It really makes a lot of sense. You need to have a way to account for the fact that sometimes the person you called ends up not being the person you reached, and it would be nice if there was some chain of cryptographic authentication that could take you all the way back to the original passport that was created. This is obviously a problem very similar to one that we have long studied in SIP. History info and the classic diversion header provided ways to kind of capture the places you had gone through. One of the things that makes our situation a bit different is that we merely need to have a signature that will still apply to whatever the canonicalized result is of the identifiers that are in a SIP message. And consequently, a lot of the like really minor transformations, like if you change the entire domain name, right, in URI, that's a big deal for like diversion. But if the user part is telephone number, it is completely inert to us. And we can still use exactly the same original passport if you change the domain name 57 times in transit. And that is a very interesting property of the way that our canonicalization stuff works. But it's also an explanation for why we're not actually using things like history info or diversion, but instead are using this new mechanism. And it may work for things like SIP Brandy if we ever do that. Next. So obviously the basic idea behind this is that when a SIP call, say, containing a passport, arrives at an entity that's going to do a retargeting, that diverting entity has its own authentication service that will then create this new passport. And this entity, interestingly enough, when it creates this new passport, doesn't sign for the originating number because it, of course, doesn't probably own the originating number. It might, but that would not be a safe assumption to make. Instead, it ends up signing over the destination because presumably it has authority over the original destination. That's why the call landed there in the first place. Next slide. So you can kind of get a sense of what this would look like from this. For an original passport that has kind of the first target, you then end up with this new passport that you see at the bottom, which in the div claim down there has the original target stuck into that. And you have instead this new destination you were targeting to in the destination. And you could, of course, then reach a new place where you got retargeted again, in which case you would build yet another one of these. But ultimately, these would all glom into separate identity headers in SIP. And as a relying party, as a verification service, you'll be able to evaluate each one of those and walk this all the way back the chain. That lets you be sure that it was supposed to get to you in the first place. And remember, I mean, this is important to our use case, among other things, because we used the dest to prevent a certain class of cut and paste attack, right? What we don't want you to be able to do is to, if I send a, SIP invite to Ecker, and the destination is Ecker, and an attacker cut and pastes that identity and sends it to Joe. Like, Joe should be able to look at this and say, wait a minute, this thing was to Ecker, not me. And so therefore, I know this person trying to impersonate John, probably. That is the idea. Now, of course, the problem is retargeting makes that very complicated. And what we're trying to capture here is a way that you could, if you were determined to, go back and look through these passports and make the necessary cryptographic chain. Next slide. I mean, this is not rocket science, I think, this one. You create the new passport, you sign over the dest. It's like there's not a lot of secret sauce here. The one question that has come up, and I know we've discussed this a bit, is do you need a reason header? This is interesting because in mechanisms like history info and diversion, you have a way to represent kind of why it is that this call has a new target. And this is useful for the application intelligence that was intended to consume things like history info. How I've felt about this anyway to date is that it's not so useful for our use case here, right? You're trying to prevent this class of impersonation threats. And to prevent that class of impersonation threats, it really doesn't matter why anything got retargeted. You just need to know that it did, and that it was retargeted by the right entity. So Mary, would you like to speak to why you think
we've had a little bit of talk about this, right? This is Mary Barnes. So I think we do want a reason. And I think, history info captures the reason code, and it also captures how the diversion happened, if you will, right? Whether or not it was just mapped, a registered contact, et cetera. And I still think that information is useful.
Well, let me put it this way.
Okay.
Is it useful to have in the SIP headers, but do we need to sign it and have that as a security property?
I understand. Yeah, right. And that I'm still debating that. I think it adds value to the end application in terms of what application is going to get cooked up. I submitted a draft and started working through some of the use cases, and I think there's going to be maybe some of the contact center situations and stuff where that might be helpful.
But it'll be there anyway in history info. So I mean, is there a threat model where somebody is going to create bogus history infos simultaneously with being able to sign for these divert things? that's my. I think that threat model does not look
well,
like.
I haven't totally worked that out.
Okay.
But what the situation we do have though is people removing history info headers.
Sure, you could remove history, and
Right,
people do that as a matter of policy, not as an attack. They do that.
Well,
for
I know,
policy
I
hiding,
understand.
right?
So what happens then if you have history info and you have diversion, you don't remove the identity header field because we're trying to tell people not to do that.
We're trying.
And well,
in part because we don't have all this information in it that people need to remove for policy reasons.
Well, I
It tells
understand
you
that,
this
but
is
what
like the
I'm
targeting
saying
tables.
is if that happens, then you actually still have valuable information there in the divert if you captured more stuff.
So, Mary, just to make sure that the subtle thing that John just said, maybe it's not too subtle, was that by adding this, we might make it more likely that
people will
someone wants
remove
to
it.
remove identity.
Oh, that someone would want to remove identity.
Because the reason why they remove history info is to obscure the
but
information you're talking about, right?
So, and like I said, I'm not 100%
Sure.
that we must have a reason, but I'm just still noodling through it, and I'll work through some more use cases. So.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
I definitely have use case for it, and in the emergency services, that there are legal things that happen with records of how did a particular 911 call get handled. So retargeting happens often, failures, other reasons, and you need to know in a provable way what happened. But to this particular discussion, we do use reason headers, but that's a diagnostic. Why did it happen is a diagnostic issue, and we don't need cryptographic assertions on that.
Yeah.
Russ Housley. So when we were designing the original passport, we went through a process to winnow it down to the smallest amount of stuff. And if there wasn't an attack being thwarted by signing it, we didn't sign it. I think we should apply the same metric.
Okay. Yes, Martin.
Yeah, Martin Daly. So we actually have a use case. We've been contacted by fairly large financial institutions where you call a number, you go to an IVR, and then the IVR eventually forwards to the ultimate destination. And so the destination C not only wants to know both B and A. And so therefore, this is a request that we've already been getting, and we'll probably get more similar along those lines.
Wait a minute, clarifying question, Martin. Yes, you want divert. Do you want the reason code?
No.
Thank you.
I hear a lot of people saying they want this divert stuff, to be honest. I mean, that seems to be, and honestly, for out of band, like I can't make out of band work without it. That may mean Martin now doesn't want it anymore, but like, I actually really need it for out of band. So, sorry, Chris. Yes.
Chris went. Yeah. So to be clear on that subject, you have identity headers that are A to B, B to C, C to D, and if you're missing B to C, there's obviously somebody that, right? So we're good. We're good from that perspective. Another note, Cable Labs and Comcast sort of got together and went through a lot of these use cases and thought of other potential ways of doing it, and we sort of landed back to what John has proposed. So we're pretty confident on this one, and just wanted to make that note.
All right, I think that's what we got on this. I don't know if do I have like a next step slide? I forgot.
No, your next one is
Okay.
on RC.
So I don't know. What do people want to do here?
So it seems to me that this is baked with the possible exception of the question around including reason. Mary, do you think you can finish the analysis that you're wanting to do, soon?
Within the next several weeks. Not
Well,
next week.
that's reasonable. I mean, it's not that this.
Mid-September.
Yeah.
I'll sign up for that.
Okay. I mean, again, it's a spec as it stands. If people want to start kicking the tires on it, they're welcome to, right? The internet runs on IDs, we say.
Well,
We try not to, yes.
So one thing you might get out of it is I'm working through call flows. So actually call flows coming out of this group would actually be an almost helpful thing, right?
I think call flows coming out of this group would be
I think it would be
thing.
extremely helpful. So I'm going to say we'll have a byproduct.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see some call flows documents here. If Rich Shockey were here, I could put the examples meme of him back up. Examples. Sorry.
Yeah, I could volunteer to contribute call flows as well.
Thanks. Jonathan.
Jonathan Lennox, not volunteering for anything, but asking a question. I guess the extensibility model is such that not doing reason now doesn't stop you from doing reason later, right?
Very true. Yep. I mean, we could create a sub element, right, of div and like do it that way that has extensibility, and then we put it in that, or it could just be a separate thing in the passport, right? So, okay. Now let's talk a little bit about RCD. That is I promised in the interim call we had in June that I would rename this from CNAM because it really wasn't helping anyone, including me. So I'm not calling it RCD. I think rich call data. Rich call data. Pretty tasty. Yes.
That's what I was wondering.
And right now it defines exactly one thing, which is NAM as a possible sub-element to it. And that provides a key value pair with the traditional SIP display name to do the kind of caller ID peering approach to this. But the idea of this is that RCD is something that's supposed to be richer than simply caller ID. We want to be able to put anything in it that we think should be rendered to a user that helps them to make a decision about whether or not to pick up a phone. That's what we mean by rich call data in this instance. And that scope is a little different from the ways that I know a few other organizations that are studying this have tried to cut this up, and that difference is intentional. I want kind of what appears in the passport here to be the stuff that either an application acting on behalf of a user will consume and do something useful with, or that will be rendered to the user directly. We've gone through a couple categories of what we think this might be. Having things about organizations, like is this a government calling you, is it a bank calling you? Henning is fond of doing things like this with caller info and so on. Even some course location data, social networking data, anything like that just gives you a sense, oh, this person calling you, there are 3 people in your, first degree network that this person is friends with. So at least there's some possibility that you might want to pick up the phone. Next slide. The basic idea of this as well is that this operates in 2 modes, kind of a first-party attestation and a third-party attestation. Without PPT, this is just something you can throw in, right? Throw in the RCD element. You don't need any capability negotiation. If the entity that receives it doesn't understand it, they won't consume it. No big deal. But then there's a second mode in which it can be used with PPT. In this case, it signifies it is a third party providing this attestation. And indeed, that a different entity is eligible to sign this passport than necessarily someone holding a credential that applies to the originating number. And this models the way that some of these kinds of services today. There are kind of 2 ways you can do this today. Either you're getting first-party data from the originating carrier, or you're getting third-party data from a service. Yes, and full disclosure, my company operates such a service in North America. Next slide. This is what it looks like without a PPT. You can just have down there the RCD with the name, Alice Atlanta, same as the display name you'd see in SIP. It's exactly taken out of the from header field. Of course, we also make noises about how you could take that out of P asserted identity or anywhere else you happen to be storing that kind of stuff in a message. Next slide. And this is what it looks like with PPT. Now we have in the X5 view a different entity that's doing the signature, but otherwise pretty much you're looking at the same claims here. It's just they're coming from a different entity. So in this case, you have reached out to a third-party service and said, hey, I got a call from this number. What can you tell me about it? What you get back is this passport signed by that third-party entity. That's the idea. Next slide. Right. One of the issues of this, oh, hi, Chris.
Just to be clear, a first-party entity could do the same thing, right? No reason.
Well, I mean, so what do you mean?
Just to give it more credibility.
Could you what?
Well, so I'm not clear on the passport. I mean, there's multiple things going through my head in terms of like the certificate specifying that that has to be there and all
Why
that
don't you
other
flip
stuff.
back to the previous one? Yeah. So in this one, obviously, this is a regular passport. So we assume that the entity that signed this is the entity responsible for the number down in a ridge. That or they have an OCN in which that number lives.
Yeah.
And by virtue of that, we think that this is a valid signature over all this information, including that num there. So so it is that entity who signs for it on the basis of their authority over that number that you trust that the name is what it is. Next slide. So then in the third party case, what's different about this is it's assert from someone who does not have authority over that
To be
ridge.
clear, that would be another identity header, assuming that
It would
you're
be a
also
different
signing
identity
a
header.
call.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It would be a different identity header. That is the idea. Yes.
So with this, I just want to verify that with PPT, is there any case that it can go again another third party? Is it possible?
You mean that
Because-
there could be multiple third party headers?
Yes,
Sure.
because-
Yeah.
But
More the merrier.
This does not prohibit to add more, right?
It does not. I mean, what is going to happen though at the end of the day is this, right? And I'll get to this in a minute, but a verification service is going to consume the set of identity headers that are associated with the call and extract the set of passports from it. It'll look at the signatures on those, and it could be that it trusts this entity, right, who signed this third-party passport, or it could be you don't, that entity doesn't trust them. And really, that's what it comes down to. And this models, though, the way that these kind of third-party services work today. Like when a carrier dips us for CNAM data today, we have like a business relationship with them and they trust it for that reason, right? And so their verification service, if we move to this kind of a model, would trust it because of that business relationship.
Yeah, Martin Dolly. I mean, the only thing cautionary that people ought to look at is when you have multiple identity headers associated with different authorities, the impact on post-dial delay scenarios.
Yeah, no, there's something to that. Next slide. Another dimension of this, is that I've been at least kicking the tires on. If we have these first and third parties, you kind of want to know why, right? People think what they think about who these colors are. And, it occurred to me that we see this already in Shaken, like in those attestation fields in Shaken. There are cases where if you're a carrier, right, the person you're signing for is your direct customer. There are other cases where you have a reseller that you have a relationship with, that they have a block of numbers, and maybe you don't then directly assign to specific customers those telephone numbers, and maybe you're just getting stuff from somebody else, right? That is why there are those kinds of attest levels in Shaken. And I suspect we probably need something similar for this. I don't know exactly what shape that needs to take yet. I think if we got the Shaken stuff specified in the IETF, I could just point to that and say like, hey, we can do like what's in that. But I mean, I think we need to understand exactly how good a match that really is. And in some cases, I think we're going to have things like crowdsourced information that people have gathered that could tell you what the name is associated with the telephone number, say. And we want to make sure that when we provide this, we can provide at least some sense to relying parties of how good we think this data is. And definitely we want our CDB flexible enough to be able to express that. Next slide. Yeah, so once we start getting to things like carrying location information around in these objects, I start to get a little nervous about the privacy implications of that as this passes through the telephone network. Necessarily, I think we're going to start having to develop a confidentiality story for Passport if the information in it is going to start to get more sensitive. And I'm going to say a little bit more about confidentiality in the out-of-band deck, but I'm starting to envision what a story for that might look like. We also, of course, would need to spec what the interface is for third-party passport acquisition. I suspect it would probably end up being out-of-band, roughly. We can talk about that. But we're going to have a whole kind of HTTP protocol that you're going to use to talk to the CPS and out-of-band to say, hey, are there passports for this? If so, give me one. Consequently, that seems like a good match for what we probably need for this. And, it'd be nice if we had some way to guarantee that people would actually let information like RCD propagate down to the users that need it to consume it. Having chosen that scope very intentionally, there are certainly use cases in which that will and will not work. And I think we might want to look a little bit at what we can do to at least identify those environments and create proper expectations for how this information will make its way through the STIR system. So next slide, is there another slide in this? Okay. Geez, I really didn't do any like next step slides for this. Next steps, there's more to be done here. There just is, right? This is still relatively, hey, I think we need this. Hey, here's what some elements might be we might want to plug into this. I think we can try to identify like the minimum subset of things and then where we might want to extend. But, you know, I think this is probably going to have a few more revs before I'm going to be that interested in talking about where we should go from here.
Paul Hoffman, in looking through the draft, I had two things just reminding me of old crap from PKIX came to mind. One is you seem to be assuming when you're going to display this to the user in some way that it's text. So the canonical example for PKIX was the logo type, you know, the picture of cat. Mm-hmm. So you need to think about that. I'm not saying.
Yeah, I hope I didn't have a restriction there for text. There are things I'm even thinking.
No, you didn't have a restriction on text, but you didn't say it's going to be text.
I think I have logo in there somewhere.
I'm sorry?
I think the logo is in there somewhere.
Okay. I was looking for the word picture or anything like that. The other is for the ones that might return a URL. Yes. Is this a URL that you want them to resolve right then or later or whatever? I think that's going to be
probably want them to resolve right then. This is like if you wanted to get a V card. And I want to provide a link to a V, or there's
as compared to my website, which you don't necessarily want to resolve, right? So, anyways, that will need to be dealt there. And I would say if you had two categories of things that might return a URL, ones that are informative and ones that are resolved now, that would be good.
Okay, no, that's good feedback.
Hala Mawafi Erickson, just questions for clarification, John. Could you help me through your thought process as to what we were gaining from getting the attestation levels for the name, the additional information, as opposed to just following
to LOA,
the attestation for the number, which will get us everything. I mean, even in one place you said if it's not available for the name, that you're going to rely on the attestation for the number. And, you know, for the longest time, I'll cite the US regulatory bodies, we've been required to follow every detail that is related to that number, to the number. Like, for example, privacy. Privacy of name has to follow number. We don't have a separate privacy label for name. And this extends to any additional or metadata that you intend to present. So what was the philosophy behind getting a separate, because I'm worried about the processing and the cooking of all of these attestation levels before we display.
Yeah, well, again, I kind of envision that a verification service relying party for this, right, is going to be presented potentially with a set of identity headers. And I mean, I certainly don't, and if the document says this, then it's saying it prematurely. I certainly am not presuming to dictate what the policy is for which one of these you accept and why, right? I think that's going to depend on all kinds of things about who your trust relationships are with. And so, I mean, it's not, I guess I'm saying I don't think we need to be prescriptive about that. I could imagine a profile like Shaken, right, or a profile developed at Addis, taking this mechanism and saying, for the North American use case, these are the things that you need to do, and these are the policies that need to be set if you're going to participate in this particular carrier ecosystem. But that isn't something we would do here. We'd just leave this open.
Okay, so it's open, but from a practical point of view, you do recognize, I mean, if you're aware of what's going on right now in the display framework back in the US, there are a lot of parameters and variables that are coming in to be analyzed before you make a decision as to whether to display a warning or not to the consumer. Sure. So if you add to the list, the branches just extend more, and I'm just wondering if we're complicating the picture.
So, I mean, is your suggestion that we should provide less information here, or what do you?
I'm wondering where the idea of not following just the attestation of the number was not sufficient.
So like 3/4 of the cases of caller ID in the US today are provided by a third party. That's the answer.
I mean, okay.
Third party.
Yeah. It is not provided by the origination carrier. It's not provided by the termination carrier. It's provided by a third party. So the third party has to be able to supply the information. That's where caller ID comes from in 3/4 of the cases today. It does not come from the origination carrier. It doesn't actually come from the termination carrier. It comes from a contractual agreement between the termination carrier and the third party, but the third party is the one that's supplying the data. That's the reality.
You're talking about a name, not a number.
The name. The name.
So the name is in a database.
Well,
If you want to.
no. We're trying to do a cryptographic assertion that the name is correct for this number.
Right.
That assertion is coming from a third party. It is not coming. We're not asserting, this claim does not assert that the caller was a particular number. It's saying that the name associated with a number, and it doesn't really have to be the one that was in the origination, but
No,
there isn't any effective way to use it.
For the
any
third
other
party
way.
case, what you're saying is correct. Yes, for the first party case, the attestation
That's
is
the
both
no
over.
PPT thing.
Right, yes.
Is the one you want, and
Right.
the PPT case is the other 3/4 of the world.
But signaling the name is the case of first party.
Yes.
So why are we talking about a separate attestation for that name when I've already verified the associated number that was just traveling in the same message? Am I missing something?
Yeah.
So maybe, Chris went, maybe look at it from, so Comcast contracts out to Company A for calling name services.
Correct.
Does Comcast want to be legally liable for what name comes back? Or do we want to have like a B attestation that states, we're subscribed to a service, you're getting what you're getting, but we're not populating AT&T customers' names and guaranteeing that we know for an absolute fact that that is in fact their name.
So how are you going to resolve the issue where?
Could you talk into the mic, please?
Use the mic, please.
How are you going to resolve the what takes precedence? Is it the attestation of the number or the name?
Like I said, this is not a policy matter we're going to set here. I could imagine a framework like Shaken Addis framework that's going to take the just building blocks that we specify here and say in North America this goes like da 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 da. But we are not in the business of setting policies for how carriers trust what and why. That's not what the IETF does.
Okay. How do you propose the originating carrier is going to attest for social media? You mentioned something about crowdsourcing in your.
Well, I mean,
location.
it's if you know, then you include that stuff. Maybe customers tell you this and trust you to share it with other people. It's not. I don't know. I mean, how do you know this in any case? These are just data elements that may or may not be useful for various use cases. This is not something that I'm saying, Martin, you need to go out and learn who everybody's Facebook is. This is not like a mandate. This is a Swiss Army knife. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just to restate, I think we want to put the flexibility in the spec, whether we use it or not. I'm okay with that perspective. We can always use it or not if we feel like we're validating with absolute certainty the calling names and origination IDs.
Yeah, I mean, that part of the spec is just like, hey, here's like a laundry list of things we might do. It doesn't even I don't even have code points for them. Right? It's just like, I don't know.
Paul Hoffman, I was assuming that it was almost all going to be third party.
Well,
And so name, if you're getting name from third party is also going to say, and here's their LinkedIn ID and all of that. I was assuming that, 10 years from now when this is all happening and we start snarfing these off and seeing how are they populated, none of them will be populated by first party. They'll all be populated by third parties.
I wouldn't say that. I don't know.
Okay,
right?
not none, but few.
So where we are today, as Brian said, is a world
Yep.
where a lot of third-party attestations for this
Right.
are how you get names today. Some of
Yep.
the rest of this stuff, like location, though, for example,
Mhm.
maybe that is something that the originating carrier is in a better position to point you to the right lists, right, or whatever.
Right.
So, I mean, and it could be that's the way to implement location is to point someone to a list.
So one of the reasons I'm interested in this for long term is there's going to be reputation scores for the parties.
There will, yes.
Where in fact it wouldn't surprise me if 10 years from now that the three common third parties for a given country actually have a better reputation than any of the first parties. And so people, no, I absolutely could believe that. I could totally believe that. And some people will say, please start using the third party because you've gotten it wrong.
So dude, I am so not going there. Okay. Since
no, but
we're just creating some building blocks. Okay.
But you're also creating building blocks where I'll be able to figure out who the third party is and then maybe do some reputation service on it.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
Chris, I think there's absolutely use cases for first-party attestation. You have a direct relationship with that customer, and you're in the best position to absolutely say, this guy provided me that information, and there's like value-added services that you might want to identify, a bank or a police station or whatever. So I think there's absolutely use case for that. I think the idea that third-party would be in, I mean, you're really relying on the telephone number to be correct, right? If the telephone number isn't correct, then
we have STIR, right? Yeah, that's the point. Like,
yeah.
Dovetail into my comment. So, Robert Sparks, Russ, could you reach over and tap us back to the examples?
I was going to say, you can answer no.
I'm going to get another glass of water here.
All right, John. So it's similar to the feedback I was giving Martin. I was trying to think of whether or not the text was perfectly clear yet on some of the semantics. One particular semantic I want you to think about, reread the text again. You anticipate this being used when there is a single authority. You'll end up with a single signature, one identity header, and that identity header means both that we've verified that the person that's placing this call has the authority to use ORIG and that the binding from that ORIG number to that name is valid.
Correct.
And if you flip to the second one, now Russ, the one with okay, got it. Sorry. This is a second signature. There's a first signature that talks about the person making the call has been determined to be has the authority to use the call. The second signature speaks only to the association of that number with that name.
True.
The thing I want to, the case that I think would be worth reading through the spec and probably adding text is consider the attack that they removed the first identity header. This is the only one you get. I can easily see some implementer making the mistake that, hey, well, there's this thing here that's got this ORIG in it that looks like a base passport thing to me, so that means that that name, that number has been determined to be, authoritatively connected to that caller. And I think we need to get the words in to make sure that no implementer will make that mistake.
You're right.
Right. I'm going to make a case for maybe that we ought to change a little bit about this in the following sense. The third party is not asserting that the origination is that number. It is not asserting that that destination is that number. So maybe it should be claiming something else.
So I thought about that. I thought about not doing this with passport at all. It's doing this with a separate job. You could. I'm not clear yet on the trade-off. I think there's some value in, because you are making that about a particular ORIG, and even it may matter what the dest is for certain, these connected identity-ish cases that may be coming down the pike. And so, which we're not going to talk about today, but Chris and I have talked about a bit already. So I think having those there, might still be helpful, but I am definitely terrified of what Robert just said. And so we need to fix that.
Chris, I think you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. So I think it's good to tie it personally. And I was just thinking that diversion also might play in here in some convoluted way, but maybe there's good use cases to come out of diversion as well.
Yeah, Jonathan Lennox. I mean, I'm not so deep on the specific details of the syntax here, but it seems like some way of claiming not, syntactically, I say this is the origin, but, I say, this name corresponds to this origin, something syntactically different that says, the input to my process was this orig.
So the way that passport is defined, those things are mandatory, right? So what we could do something like this. We could say instead of we could make a new like sub element of orig. That means actually this is something different, right?
Yeah.
And
the origination
still
is not the
stick
telephone number. The origination is a passport containing a telephone number.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And like, if we did that, and maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of options like that. I definitely welcome feedback on this on the list, though. This is something that we got to figure out. Like I said, I'm not presenting this as something I think is particularly baked at this point, but it's getting a little closer.
I would like to encourage him to go forward. We've talked about this. We've pushed it off. We said we weren't going to deal with this for a long time. The basic STIR mechanism is going. It's now the time to do this. Absolutely. I think this is going in the right direction. We're bringing, as we look at you've got an actual example here, and we can look at it and say, okay, is that what we really want to see? Well, a lot of it is yes. I think this first party, third party thing is exactly what we want to have. I think the discussion that the questions you raised early about being able to do reputations on third parties and other things, very important to get in the text. And this discussion that we just have is also important to get in the text, however we end up with syntax.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments on RCD for right now? So we had a agenda bash in the middle of the meeting. Ecker got called away to go fight a flame war in another room. He should be back in a few minutes. So our proposal is to reorder. He wants to be here for out of band. Our proposal is to reorder. Let's talk just a little bit about freshness and give him an opportunity to get back before we get into the out of band deck. If that's okay with everybody, I'm going to take a second to grab the slides. I don't have them preloaded on my laptop, so just a second.
Come on up, Sean.
Hello, my name is Sean Turner. You may have seen me earlier today.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. It's a great time. So we're here to talk about really the requirement for STIR certificates to have a freshness mechanism to ensure that that there's an authorization mechanism. And right now we really got kind of two drafts that are kind of there are two drafts that we have basically in point. So one is STIR certificates OCSP, and really what that was the stuff that got peeled out of the STIR certificate draft and split into its own draft. And this other idea, the STIR certificate short-lived, which came out of an ISG basic discuss. So that's basically what we're talking about now. So next. So yeah, we got two real paths. Like regardless of what we do, we need to understand some, a freshness mechanism to understand whether or not the certificate that's used by the signer is the thing that is authorized to sign the call. So we need to know whether, or whether or not it's been delegated. We've got a bunch of mechanisms that are out there, and the draft, the OCSP draft, actually explores a bunch of them. Two of them that are out there right now are serials and SCVP. We pretty much know that, looking at the analysis, we're just not going to do those. So, let's just take them off the table. So that's basically we're kind of blowing them out of the water. So at the end of the day, we only have two real choices, which is OCSP and short-lived certs. And there's kind of trade-offs between the two. And I'm going to be perfectly honest here, right, is that if the OCSP draft, which I'm authoring, dies tomorrow, I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm not going to stand here and fight to the death for it. We need to make sure we come up with a good mechanism, and I'm okay with that.
So a little bit of clarification. I think the working group already acknowledged that draft is dead. It is marked dead in the data tracker.
Yeah. So so the fact that it's dead doesn't really hurt my feelings. I've written a lot of RFCs and don't care. So we've been exploring both paths a bit, and basically we're mostly here to talk about short-lived certs because that really seems to be the way going forward. It's kind of how would we do those? So next. So short-lived certs, right? Really the idea is essentially that you've got people that are making the calls, and they talk to an intermediary who the interaction between the endpoint and the intermediary are unsigned, and the intermediary can get a cert that's short-lived, and they can sign the thing and off they send it, and it can be either between the two intermediaries or between the PBX and the intermediary. And so the idea is that if they get the person who's doing the signing, which is the intermediary or the PBX, can actually get a cert, they can have it for a year, 2 hours, 4 hours, whatever. Sign the message, include the cert, and then the validators at the end, which are the PBX endpoints or the user endpoints, can actually do the validation. It's really simple. Next, sorry. So you can really issue these certs for individual TNs, and you can basically pick the expiry point. Like you can say it's, like I said, it's an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, whatever you want. Though it's not necessary that it actually just be for intermediaries. You could actually extend it in your mind to actually be for actual signers of the calls. That's the really great part, is that we can kind of decide how to hang ourselves based on how much we want to make it complex. Because and the first point at the beginning is to like try to limit it and then kind of expand out. And it's one of the good points about the whole thing. And the idea is basically saying we're really only attesting for the signer of the call for this call, which is really great, but it also introduces a bunch of other complexities. So the real question is like, what does short-lived really mean, right? Hours, days? I don't know. Maybe we actually don't have to specify that here. We can leave that up to some other group. We could just say, here's how you do it, and then North American number registry, whatever, whoever it is, picks the number to the South American people in Europe, say, well, for us it's a week, for these other people it's 3 days, whatever. You can put those in, that's great. The really hard part is to get a new cert, because at the end of the day, like doing these attestations is like super easy, but like certificate management is like a pain in the ass, right? So at the end of the day, it's like, how do we do this? And is Colin here? He's not here. So he's got a PhD, and apparently he couldn't figure out how to get a cert out of like a well-known provider, and it was kind of like a joke, but it was kind of serious. There's some magic that needs to happen. So to solve that problem, next, we got Acme. So the whole idea is, so apparently I'm talking to the choir here. So the A in Acme is automated. Woohoo! So the idea is you take it out kind of the hands of the user to actually try to do these things, and that's really the point. Is the idea is that as a client, you can prove that you own this thing for a little bit, and then be able to get a certificate and just automatically provision it, and you just get a cert. And great, you sign a thing, and they can get a link to it. The relying party can actually get it. Hey, to validate it, magic happens, and it's actually magic. And you know what? This stuff is deployed, and it works. Scary, awesome. Next. So really, there's also two drafts in Acme right now that they're talking about, is this Acme telephone number and the service provider stuff, and really that it shows that essentially that Acme can be used for this kind of stuff. It's just not that hard to do. There's not rocket science. It's like, how do we make this stuff kind of work, right? I mean, Rich, I'm not making this up, right? Like, yeah. Yeah. So he's like, I don't even have a PhD. You might, I actually don't know. Acme telephone number. So Acme telephone number now there's a way to delegate a telephone number from a service provider cert. And like I was talking with Chris before the social, and actually one of the big questions was like, how would we represent the service provider code? What would a name be in a cert? How would you do that? You know what? There's plenty of ways we can stick values in a cert. That's really the awesome part about the certificate, because it's infinitely flexible. Thanks, Russ. And one of the things that we can do is come up with ways to do this thing. And like, if we need to come up with a special new name, like the way we do it, we can kind of do all that. And it's all kind of like not a big thing. We can put domains in there. We don't care. Like, so, it's open ended basically, which is good and bad.
Yeah, John Peterson. So actually, Martin had a comment on the list about this. I still haven't replied to this. But about why we didn't stick SPC into the subject default name or some other field like that exists. I mean, the short answer for me, at least, to that has always been that by having the TN auth list contain this bundle of both the service provider codes, which in North America would be like OCNs or whatever, and TNs, is that the two identifiers are in their own way kind of interchangeable, right? Like if you can interrogate the NPAC and ask it like, what is the OCNs associated with this TN, and vice versa. Okay, I've got this OCN, like what are the set of TNs that are associated with it? So I kind of view them, because of that, you can do things like this delegation, right? Where if I can get a cert and we identify a token format that's sufficiently generic to be able to say things like, you know, as the authority signing for this OCN, this SPC, I say it's kosher for you to delegate this TN to this particular user, which we think can then do through STAR. It's the Acme STAR that is. There's like all kinds of mechanism that we're going to be building over there that will work for this. It'll be awesome. I think most of that part, like how you explain what the SPC is and this. I mean, it's pretty much baseline to either STIR certs or to these documents now. And
exactly. Yeah,
so I think this is going to work.
Yeah.
Chris, just to clarify, I think my query was, how do you tie the certificate specifically to that, like with a unique ID or something like that?
Yes, it was. Yes.
So that was more the thing that I think we need to clarify.
Okay, fair enough. And that really was all about the last point. So next slide. Oh, an Acme STAR. Look, hey, we've got short-lived certs. Look, it's not that hard. It's already being worked. It's based on a use case which was possibly argued, but was least legitimate. So we'll go with that point. And it allows a name owner to delegate a name and quickly resolve it. So that's pretty much, you know.
So John Peterson again. We do need STAR to be a little more generic than it is, I think, to be applicable to this case, because STAR contains this language like about like DNO, domain name owners, things like that. I mean, it's really specific to the LURC problem space. And I think you could make it a more generic mechanism that would be applicable to this. And Rich, you can expect me to be at Acme to talk about that on Friday.
Right. So the only thing that I would add to that is basically like one of the things that was the problem was it was trying to figure out like how to narrow down the use cases. And my theory for why LURC didn't go forward was the fact that it was kind of like broad and we couldn't figure out what it was. Here, if you actually said that here's what we're going to use it for, you could narrow it down and you could maybe say we could do this and like actually solve a problem.
Hi, Rich Sauls, Acme co-chair. We actually split up the STAR stuff into renewable short-term automatic renewals, and then the delegation is a separate thing. So it'll be, you know, because that everybody agrees the renewals is good. No comment on the second. So hey, it's fine. But anyhow, yeah, it's a more tractable set of problems, separable set of problems.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So that's really great. Like I said, I really think that we could kind of adopt it if we narrowed it down. I think it wouldn't be a super stretch to say that it would fit for this particular use case, and we can adopt it and work on it, as opposed to like having well, do we need to have a BOF to figure out what we're going to do? Like, it's easier to narrow it down and decide it on that. Sorry. Thanks. Next. So what to do? As we get better alignment with Acme on STAR, we might something we consider adopting here. And I seriously think this is, so based on the ISG comments from Ecker, was kind of like, hey, great, like OCSP has its issues, mostly privacy based. The short-lived stuff would really kind of like work out in the long run. And I actually think that if we have an audit, so the big concern was we don't have a way to get certs to be able to sign this stuff. And if we have a way that we can do this quickly and actually get the certs and be able to verify them, like it's like a win. So why wouldn't we do this? And so my basic theory is like, why don't we just do this, drop the OCSP stuff for posterity? It's there in the the data tracker marked dead or whatever, and let's just do the short-lived one. Well, I mean, we kind of did that, but like,
yeah. So Brian Rosen, I'm fine with that as a proposal. I got up to say that I think that we need to write some text that talks about the fact that although the cert itself is short-lived, that's the time at which you can do a signing, and we need to be talking about how you retrospectively go figure out whether or not this
is a really
was okay.
Great. How do you do PKI based stuff? Because initially when they came out and signed stuff, right, they duffed it. So when the signature was valid back in the day, but your current time clock was past that date, it would show it as invalid. So eventually they had to be like, oh, that's not actually how it works. The signature was good back then. The time is different, but it was good back then. If you did that same phone call now, it wouldn't be valid. Because the validate. So, I mean, I think there's ways that we can explain that fairly easily. And now people, I think, actually get that point.
Right. I don't think we have a problem. And I don't think we need any more mechanism. I think we need words in the document that explain this.
So I think that would be like security consideration number one. By the way, a signed phone call is good for a validity period of this based on that. you can keep using the cert if you'd like, but the call won't be good anymore, and the call is still also good in the past tense. And I assume Paul's going to talk about it. Right. Yes. Absolutely. So you can narrow it down to that. Yes.
Yeah, just because the
Correct.
cert expired between the calls.
Yes.
Right. Well, no, but that's actually a really important point. So that's security considerations number one. Security consideration number two is what kind of CAs do you trust? And I think it's worthwhile, just because for those of you who don't know, I work at ICANN, and we have a whole bunch of different CPSs now for things that we do, which actually aren't all aligned based on, is there an OCSP responder for this CA?
So-
Are there, do we publish CA? So I think saying there is no expectation for OCSP, SCVP, or even CRLs from these CAs would be a really good thing, so that some person who comes into this late. Yes.
To
Okay.
get in
Good.
the super,
I just thought Sean was about to argue with me.
No, to get in the super weeds of this, I would put that in the CP, and the CPS would then say what we do or not, and you would actually put a certificate.
But I would
You could
say
do that
in
kind of
this
stuff.
document, in
Yeah.
the security considerations, is to say CPs for the CAs who might do these short-lived certs are not expected to do, and list the things that an outside person who is used to CPs from the web trust world would expect. Because we're just getting hit really badly with that.
We would definitely try to differentiate how we're different, so that the people that are providing these certs would know what they're looking for, what they're not, and make it blatantly clear that this ain't the web PKI.
Chris, I just want to clarify the last comment about tying certs to calls. That there isn't any explicit tie, right? If I have a 2-week cert, I can originate multiple calls with that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So,
okay.
but you could actually do it per phone call if you really wanted to.
Right, you
But I don't know
could,
why
yeah.
you would, but you could.
But then you're
shooting yourself in the foot.
Right. You could get more certs, and
So
the
hey,
times would overlap, and
yeah.
it doesn't-
Craziness ensues,
Right.
right? Yeah.
John Pierce again. So interesting, one of the use cases for that was if you're someone who owns a large block of numbers, but you don't want to reveal what that block is, you could get a short-term cert for just a single number, right? For the purpose of placing a single call, and basically every time you made a call, you could get a different cert for it. Now, you'd have to be pretty paranoid, right? To be concerned about your data being collected and so on in that way. But if you were, this would allow it.
Yeah, so that's one of the concerns that we had initially was oh, look, you've got a block of numbers and you don't want to expose it in your cert by saying I'm authorized for all of these things. You can just say do one at a time. You'd have to be pretty super paranoid and also have a pretty good infrastructure to support the fact that you could actually issue all those certs.
Jonathan, the next, is there at some point, probably not in the original document, but maybe in the future, going to need to be operational guidance on when you need to get, how soon you need to get your cert?
I think yes, but I think at some point we are providing the mechanisms, and the other groups will specify what it is and how fast they want it, and what that means, right?
Okay, right.
So at the end of the day,
the dangers of what happens if you're 50. A minute before their cert expires and the CA is down or something.
Absolutely. So the great point is, thanks to Russ again for writing lots of considerations about PKIS related stuff, that a lot of that stuff is already documented. So we can literally point to it or pull it or whatever we want to do.
I think STAR says you need to do it halfway through your expiry interval,
which is a really good way to do it. So, my theory is that since the OCSP draft is dead as a doornail, thank you very much, we should actually ask for working group adoption for the short-lived cert one. Do we need to do that? Can we just? Is that crazy? John, do you want to rev it a little bit more?
So, John Pearson, I'd be happy to adopt it. I was going to say, though, we could also publish the OCSP one because it's practically done.
Yeah. So
just for the sake of having the solution documented.
So we literally cut it out of the STIR search draft because people were oh, it's got privacy considerations. If we bolstered the security considerations, which I actually think are fine at this point, and just published it, it'd be great. It's not one of the. It's it's published. It's not. Maybe it's informational. You want to do historic. I don't really care, right? So
or it could just be an ID and it will survive on the way back.
On the way back, whatever you want to do.
Yeah,
I just don't.
Is there value in
right? So that's the question.
So pushing it through the ISG.
So, you have to do that, right? And then I will have to help make sure it gets through, and the ISG will actually have to review it. So
I hear you. I'm just saying.
I'm not stressed either way this goes.
Like I said before, don't send mixed messages to somebody 3 years in the future who doesn't know what this is but needs to apply some security stuff to it. Having an RFC that says OCSP will make them think OCSP is important.
I mean, we could put in the draft, hey, we thought about this, we published it for information, go look at this other draft, because actually that's the way to go. I mean, so again, Paul, I'm actually perfectly freaking happy with that, because like one less thing I got to track. So maybe I mean, to the chairs, can we do that? Is that okay if we do a call for adoption for the short-lived shirt stuff? What? Did we?
Yeah, there is a draft. I
John and
haven't read it recently enough to know. Does it reflect where we're going? Does it talk about the STAR stuff?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I mean, it's like Edgar and John. Like, they pump this stuff out like regularly. Right?
But who has read it? Who has read the short-lived draft? All right, so let's give some people some time to read it, and let's take adoption to the list.
Sure.
We'll see if we can get that done quickly.
Max Pala, Cable Labs. Just a small question. The adoption of the short-lived certificates will prevent people from using longer-lived certificates and using OCSP, or is that an option that we say never going to be supported? Don't do it. So that's the reason why we might publish the OCSP as an informational if someone wants to do that, or
I think the message here is here's how we should do it, and we can say in the here's how we should do it that we talked about the other thing, but not write down the details of the other thing that we don't really want people to do.
Brian Rosenwright, I don't want two mechanisms and then having the interoperability problems that two mechanisms provide. So I'd rather let it die.
Our concern with OCSP long-term is the sheer scale of it. So that's why we prefer the short-term certs.
Yeah, I mean, so again, like this comes down to like we could do this. Is it going to get done?
I'm hearing that there needs to be more words on the list, just that we leave a good fossil record about this conversation. So let's make sure it gets poked.
So it helps you make sure that it's done.
Subir Das, Sean, I think you mentioned that what exactly the value of the short means here, right? It's a day or week or hours. That will be defined somewhere else.
Right.
Is it correct?
That's my theory, is that we provide a mechanism to indicate it, and we might give some kind of like, we're not talking about years, we're talking less than that. And then some other group can say, some other group, i.e. regulators, can say, for North America, Europe, Japan, pick this, or industry group can actually get up and say, like, look, we're going to do it for like a week or 2 days or whatever, and like leave it available.
So other plus means not in IETF.
I think that's correct. Okay. Because like we're not the operators of this stuff, right? We're just providing the mechanism.
Yes,
let somebody else.
Yes,
pick
exactly.
What that
and
is.
the short means could be interpreted differently, right, in the different region,
so,
right?
Exactly. So if you make it too long, here's a problem. If you make it too short, here's the other problem. And like, hey, pick something smart.
Chris, I think there's too many use cases and some best practice to operational best practice that we need to learn before we lock it down to anything. So
I mean, even if we were going to do it here, absolutely, I completely agree.
All right, we should go ahead and start in on out of band. Everybody good with that?
Break it as I want.
So Ecker has forsaken us. Things over at HTTP BIS are pretty interesting, I guess. So I'll do this myself. Next. Just a brief reminder of why we're here. So somebody told me, this figure's been going around, that in North America, at least like 50% or over 50% of all landline calls are now going to be SIP calls or something like this year is the projection, which is pretty cool. If you told me that in 1999, that it would only take us 18 years to get to that point, all right, I might not have broken out the party hats, but here's the problem. Not everything is yet end-to-end SIP. And we need to have a story, if we're serious about putting a dent in robocalling, about how this is going to work just for POTS calls. Because there's a lot of calls that are just like cell phone to cell phone calls today. And that is what has motivated what we call here out of band, which is basically taking out of band of SIP how we get passport objects from an originating authentication service to a terminating verification service that'll let you know that the call's legit. Next slide. This is all based on this metaphor of something we call a CPS. We've just been talking about CPs and CPSs, different kind of CPS here. This is a call placement service. And the idea is that you'll have endpoints that are in some way smart. We kind of assume what it means to be smart for this purpose is that you have an internet connection and a PSTN connection, typically. You will store at the CPS a passport. You'll make a passport just like you would ordinarily for a SIP call. You stick it up at the CPS, and then a POTS call happens. When the POTS call reaches its destination, whoever lands on that side, and by smartphone, we could mean a gateway, we could mean an enterprise, we could mean an iPhone, we could mean all kinds of things. It goes out and retrieves the passport. Martin, already you have an issue, please.
No, I just have a, Martin Dolly, I just have a simple question, John.
Yes.
Okay, so how does the originating UE know the capabilities of the terminating UE before they even initiate a call to know even to do a store passport?
They don't.
Okay.
No, this is a leap of faith. So the practice that probably if we were to write an architecture recommendation for ourselves, which I doubt we will for this, would be like if you're a SIP entity, because probably you're a SIP entity if you support an authentication service, even if you're sending a SIP invite simultaneously, just store a passport just in case. What happens is halfway through this call, it ends up dropping to the PSTN, and it could end up terminating somewhere where someone, if they supported this, might be able to get it. What we want to try to do is to make it possible for this to work in as many environments and architectures as we can. So there is a leap of faith to that. Next slide. All right, so there's two big questions about this. The first is, how do you find a CPS? I mean, if we assume there's like one CPS in the universe, well, that'd be handy. I would love to operate one for you. Somehow I don't think that's how this is going to work out, though. Probably there's going to be all kinds of different CPSs being run by different people, and there's going to have to be a service discovery component of that. There are a couple of like weaselly words about this right now in the specification, but I don't know is the short answer. It really depends a lot on exactly how federated it gets and how you do it. We have a few initial ideas in the draft, but I don't even want to talk about that today. We've got a whole bunch of problems to solve before we even get to that problem. So let's talk about what I think is the second important problem of this, which is how do we make sure that the right parties are storing and retrieving these things from the CPS? Because otherwise, this is just one massive per pass target. Like we're just creating this like, please tap this, or if I am the one entity in the universe that gets to operate it, I could monetize this data so successfully and it would just be so awesome to have all this data pass through it. So how do we minimize that? What's the best story we can come up with to make this work? That's what I'd like to work on a bit today. Next slide. This question of who gets to store passports is interesting for, among other things, this use case. I mean, you can imagine like designing a CPS in such a way that you required the originating user agent to kind of authenticate itself. You've got a certificate anyway, right? You're signing a passport. So presumably the authentication service could just authenticate itself to the CPS and say, by virtue of that, please store this passport. But then you've got this use case, and Brian is a fan of this one, I know, where shouldn't a gateway that's sitting right on the edge of the PSTN be able to be the entity that provisions this up to the CPS? Next slide. The short answer is because passports are already signed themselves, it almost doesn't matter who does the storing, right? I mean, relying parties trust these things because of the signature that's in them. So, I mean, in some sense, that whole authentication pass may not even really be necessary, provided that you have a way to prevent this from becoming a DDoS mechanism, provided you have a way to prevent just anyone from flooding the CPS with all kinds of like bogus passports, broken passports or whatever for various numbers, so that someone retrieving them would never be able to do it. Provided you can lick that, then I think you can get this to work. Now, what Ecker was going to talk about here today was one of his fancy ideas for how we could do that. There are things you can do where by minimizing your interaction with the kind of the CPS, the instances in which you have to authenticate yourself, where you could get like tokens in advance and then kind of spend those tokens as you upload passports to it in a way that won't actually be tieable to the credential that you used to authenticate yourself to the CPS. This would be fancy, and we get scared when we have to do fancy things. Something fancy like that probably would be necessary to lick that DDoS thing provided that we don't want to have you just authenticate to the CPS. If we have you just authenticate directly to the CPS, what we lose are two things. One, the privacy component. The CPS knows who you are, knows your IP address is tied to that telephone number, pretty much. The second thing we lose is the gateway case, right? Because the gateway won't possess the certificate that allows you to upload passports for that given number. And so weighing this, I think we're going to come up with something along those lines to do it. I'm not going to try to do justice to this myself. Ecker can do that a little later, but next slide. So that's the upload side. So kind of to summarize, the good news of upload is, the authentication isn't as much of a problem as you'd think because the passport itself, right, has a signature in it. And it's not going to be accepted as valid by anyone unless that signature is valid, and it doesn't matter who, delivers it to you. You could find it, as I'm fond of saying, written on a piece of paper in a bus stop, right? Provided the signature validates, then that is a valid passport. And so, you don't have to worry that much about authentication, again, provided you can then lick this DDoS problem. So now the retrieval side. And this is what we have in the draft today. The draft spends a lot of time discussing this. There are three semantics we consider for kind of what the question is you ask when you receive a call. So put yourself in the verification services shoes here. A POTS call has just come in. You're seeing a calling party number in it. You know your telephone number. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, you know how to find a CPS, that there's only one in the world. We'll assume that for the sake of this argument. What do you ask the CPS? And a lot of this question comes down to what information do we want to try to keep from the CPS and what information do we want to try to reveal to it? And so we have three potential semantics we discussed in the draft today. They have three very different security implications. If we kind of assume that you're going to have to authenticate yourself to the CPS in order to be eligible to receive these calls from it, something like B probably makes a lot of sense because you're already going to have to reveal that information to the CPS anyway. If you're saying, I want to receive calls from my number, and to prove that I should receive calls from my number, I'm going to give you my certificate that shows I own this number. Or maybe the service provider certificate that shows I own an OCN that contains that number. Yes, Mark.
Okay, Martin Dolly. So, I haven't read this draft, but thinking of a use case just based on your figure, the originating UE nor the originating network will know at the time where they would potentially do signing of whether you're going to hit a PSTN gateway and go through the scenario that you're talking about. And so potentially you could have a situation whereby, you're going to get, the passport coming from the CPS and receiving it in SIP signaling, assuming there was no PSTN in the middle.
Well, but the point is the verification service kind of has to go out of its way to go ask the CPS. So if it gets the call and it's got a passport can use in the SIP signaling, it's not going to go bother to ask the CPS, right?
Okay, I just want to make sure that's what you're assuming then.
Well, I mean, so I want to qualify that a little bit because, of course, there could be multiple entities, right, that are involved in the creation, of identity headers for this. And so with that caveat, I wouldn't want to rule out that one entity might have used the CPS and one put it through SIP signaling. But the basic idea is, if you received a passport through SIP signaling, it would at best be redundant, right, to go look in the CPS if you can use what's already there and it's good enough for you to decide whether or not to alert the user or what to render the user enough information for it to be useful for them to decide to pick up the phone. Yes, Chris.
Quick question, maybe address it further on. Are you also thinking of the security of these requests, that I couldn't just go incrementally through all the numbers and request B?
Well, right. So that's what I meant when I say the authentication component of this is why B looks, because basically, give me passports for the called number is great when I'm the entity that owns that number and I have a cert to prove it, or, a TN cert or an OCN cert. So yeah, we want to have some mechanism like that with the following caveat. Next slide. Encryption helps. So if they're just encrypted blobs, right, that are in the CPS, then it doesn't matter if you're the right guy asking for it. You can say, give me things that are associated with this call party number. And provided the CPS is clever enough to always be willing to give you an encrypted blob, whether or not there's a call in progress. there's no way for you to be able to tell if you don't have the cert to decrypt a valid passport, whether or not there's in fact a call in progress. And so again, this comes back down to this question of how much can we alleviate the need to authenticate yourself to the CPS? Because the more times the entities that are doing storage and retrieval are authenticating themselves to the CPS, the more data the CPS can gather about who the people are that are associated with calls. And you can imagine how tricky you could get with this, right? If you wanted to. You could have a retrieving side ask the CPS for passports when there are no calls to make sure that the CPS has no idea whether in fact you have a call at any given moment. And you can try to generate a lot of kind of bogus traffic like that, specifically to thwart per pass or metadata collection, or the things that are monetizable in this. These are the kind, and this is what we need to resort to, right? Is architectures like this to make this even remotely tractable. But yeah, the key point of this is you need to be able to decrypt the passports to get any value from the retrieval. Now this is tough. Let's not disguise the problems with this. It makes managing call forwarding cases much more difficult. Because if what I'm asking is give me passports that are for my turning number, well, we just had this whole lovely discussion about Divert a little while ago. You're going to get the last one of those, right? But not any of the previous ones unless we do something special, unless we make some special provision for how to do out of band with Divert, which is what we will have to do to get this to work, I think. There's a further problem of encrypting to who? Because there can be a carrier, there can be then they gave some numbers to a reseller, and then that reseller sold them to an enterprise, and the enterprise delegated them down to individuals. All of those entities could have certificates. And so you're kind of making a decision when you encrypt these about who specifically you encrypt it to. And there are two components of that. First of all, you need to be able to discover their certificates. And second, you then need to make the set of encrypted blobs you need to get this to be successful. And it may be very difficult for you to anticipate which one of those potential relying parties is going to end up consuming the stuff you put in the CPS. So as I'm fond of saying this story is always a little dark, right? This isn't an easy thing to get done, but I think there may be a pony in this as we get past all the fanciness. Keep going. All right, so that I've already kind of revealed what I think is the least worst way that we've been able to think of to date to get this to work, which is pretty much to allow anybody to store encrypted passports indexed by the public key that was used to encrypt them. Not, as the draft says today, by the called party number, but instead by the public key that you somehow, probably by asking the CPS, by asking a key store adjacent to it, discovered for that called party number that you use to encrypt this particular blob. So what this means is, on the retrieval side, the entity is asking for passports, is saying, hey, has anybody sent any passports to this key at this time? And therefore, you won't get all the blobs. If the storer had to stick in blobs for the carrier and the reseller and the enterprise and the user, and you're just the user, right? You have the user's key. You go to the CPS and say, give me blobs for the user. Yes,
what if it represents a block of numbers?
Works same way.
You would just get all the calls in progress for that block of numbers, or?
Potentially. Yep. I mean, so again, the alternative is that you are going to, so when you say calls in progress, you're going to get all calls that are in the process of being set up for the lifetime that these blobs exist in the CPS at this time. So if you are dealing with 10,000 calls a second for your number block, you will be asking every second for all the passport blobs that are associated with that.
John Lennox, I mean, it seems like without some significant chaffing, the key query mechanism is an interesting per pass target still, yes?
So it is a per pass target, again, insofar as we have to assume that, if entities only ask for keys at such a time as they're placing calls, then yes, it's a per pass target. If you create dummy traffic, right, of various kinds where you're just constantly asking for keys for different things, then it becomes much harder to guess who's calling it.
The other concern I somewhat have is, often the reason why I'm using PSTN rather than, the internet when I have both is because my internet is really crappy right now. So I'm just concerned if I have to, to make a call, I have to query for a key, get it down, do the crypto, upload it. That may well take longer than it takes the PSTN call to go through. And so when the called party queries, there's nothing there. So is there some way that, he can try again or be asked, hey, if something new shows up in the next, 30 seconds?
Well, remember that the verification service acts in the time frame that users are alerted. So it doesn't, you don't wait to alert until this resolves typically. But so you may have more grace time than you think there. Yes, Jim.
So, John, we're at the end of our time, so I think we can get away with going about 5 minutes over, but definitely not more than that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, sorry. We'll get our cookies in a sec.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a very...
Jim?
Thank you, John. Just a very quick question. Have you given any thought yet to where those public keys would be stored and how people would find them? Are we talking about maybe throwing them in the DNS and assuming something like enum?
I think there's going to be a service. It may be adjacent to the CPS in some way. I think that we might be able to do some things with CPS integration of this actually that are not insane. But as to Jonathan's point, this becomes yet another purpose target, and it's its own whole thing in this. So next slide. Sorry. We also need to figure out how to work this through Divert, as I said. And of course, the service discovery component of this is still pretty much a to-do at this point. And that's going to be a lot of fun, let me tell you. So next slide. One final thing to say about this, because I already brought this up in the RCD discussion. This is the other gateway case. This gateway case really don't work so much with cases where on side B you need to authenticate yourself, right, to the CPS. But of course, if you got an encrypted blob from CPS, you could always just stick that into the SIP traffic and send it along, provided we had something like a SIP identity encrypted header, which we don't have today. Now, of course, that we could do that with a PPT. There are like a bunch of different ways we could syntactically represent it. But because of those RCD-ish cases, I'm beginning to suspect we're going to need a just standard way in SIP to carry an encrypted passport. And this might be a use case for that. Next slide. So we got more to do. A lot of the slideware I was presenting today is stuff that is not in the draft now. I think we're getting a little closer, and Ecker and I and Cullen and I have been talking about this a lot this week. Definitely, we've got to figure out a ton of stuff about it. But so I'm not asking for anything other than for you guys to send comments and ideas and objections. It is really useful to talk to people about this, and we're going to keep iterating. What did I forget? Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. It's all H2. All right, thanks. I think that's it, unless anybody has anything else.
All right, we're done. Thanks, everybody.
Ecker, I hand-waved your fancy storage stuff.
One more out there.
Hey, when it's like it's making nonsense, like